Hey there, so when we last left off, we had the guy on the screen moving around. Now we are going to add our bad guys. So in order to add the bad guys, we need to make a bad guy class. Now what I'm doing here is I am not overriding the SK_sprite node. I'm not inheriting directly from the SK_sprite node. Instead, I'm just making kind of a class. Create a new Swift file. We'll call this bad guy.swift. And this will represent each bad guy. Of course, we need to import SpriteKit. Then we have a class bad guy. Our bad guy, each bad guy is going to have his own speed. And we're going to make that a float, which is going to be 0.0. They're going to have the actual SK_sprite node, which we can hold on to. And we need an initializer for this. We're going to hold the current frame for the bad guy, which is going to be equal to 0. And I will explain what this is in a second. We're also going to hold a random frame. And what we're doing is we're going to make the bad guy come onto the stage at a certain time. We'll keep track of the current frame that they're on, and we'll keep track of a random frame, that frame in which they start moving. Keep track of whether they're moving or not. Keep track of the current, because they're going to be going on a sort of sine wave using the sine trigonometry function. So we'll keep track of their current angle that they're at for the math. We'll keep track of the range that we want them to travel, and we'll increase that as things get harder. And we'll keep track of their current y position, which is going to be equal to a CG float, because remember, anything having to do with position in SpriteKit is a CG float. So we'll create a constructor, or an initializer, however you want to call it. We'll initialize their speed here so that we can make each one a different speed. And we'll initialize the guy that's going to be the actual sprite node. So we'll set the speed to be equal to the speed. We'll set the guy to be equal to the guy. And at this point, once they're initialized, we'll say set random frame. Now this is a function that I've used before that uses this arc for random uniform, which will give you a point from the start index to the end index, and it'll find a random number in between those. So we're going to convert this all to an integer, and that way we'll get an integer that's random from 50 to 200. And that we'll set as the random frame. And as the frames go by, we'll increase the current frame, and at some point we'll see if it's equal to or greater than the random frame. If it is, then we know it's that bad guy's turn to come onto the stage. So all that this does is it just gets a frame, or it gets a random integer between 50 and 200. So now we have our bad guy class. We can go back to our game scene. Don't forget to save that. And in our game scene, we can add the bad guy, or add bad guys. So after add Jeff, it doesn't really matter what order you put this in. We can write add bad guys. And what we want to do is we want to create a function that creates each individual bad guy. So we'll create a function called add bad guy, the singular version of that. And for this, we want to take a name of the bad guy. So a bad guy named string. We want to grab their speed, which is going to be a float. And we want to grab their y position, where we want to put them on the screen. And it's a CG float because we're dealing with SpriteKit. So now we need to import all of our bad guys' images into this application. So I have 3 different bad guys. I have Boris, Natasha, and Paul. So we're going to create, first let's create Boris. So just name this Boris. And you can see I have the low res one and I have the high res one. So we'll take the high res, which is 60 by 60, and the low res, which is 30 by 30, half the size. And we'll put it in the 1x and the 2x. Next, we can create Natasha. New image set. And for Natasha, we have the low res and we have the high res. So for the high res, we'll take it and we'll put it in here. The low res, which is 30 by 30, we'll put it in there. And then last we have Paul. And for the low res, we'll put it in the 1x, and for the high res, we'll put it in the 2x. So now we have all of our bad guy images. Now we can create a function that adds the bad guys, and that adds an individual bad guy. So when we want to add one, we'll just create a bad guy node, which is going to be an SK_sprite node. And we'll use an image named whatever they sent in. So they're going to send in which bad guy they want to create, and we will create that bad guy. We're going to need to create a physics body for the bad guy, but we'll create that in a second. First, we'll just create the bad guy, because we're not going to have them collide just yet. So for this, we want to use our new class bad guy, and it needs to take a speed, which is the speed they sent into this function, and the actual bad guy sprite node, which is going to be the bad guy node. So now we have this bad guy class. We need to create an array of bad guys and append this in there. So we'll create a var bad guys, an array of bad guys. And we'll call this add bad guys, not add guys. So now that we did that, we can actually append our individual bad guy into the array of bad guys, so we can keep track of them. So we can say bad guys dot append, and we'll append that new individual bad guy. Now we want to actually put the bad guy in the right position, so we'll create a function called reset bad guy. And let's create a function that will put a bad guy in the right position. This way we can call this many different ways. So it wants the bad guy node, which is the SK_sprite node, and it wants the Y position of that bad guy. Which is going to be a CG float. And all we need to do is just say bad guy node dot position dot x is equal to, let's make an end of screen right position, which we didn't create yet. Let's create where the end of the screen right is. So in order to do that, we'll come up here and we'll say var end of screen right is going to be equal to a CG float, because we're dealing with positions in SK_sprite node. And we'll also create an end of screen left, because you know we're going to need it. So we can set that here. So we can say end of screen left is going to be equal to the left side of the screen. So that because 0, 0 is in the middle of the screen, we can say self.size.width divided by 2. And because it's negative, we'll just multiply that times -1, but as a CG float, because we're dealing with CG floats. And the end of the screen right is the exact opposite. So we can say self.size.width divided by 2. So now we go back to our reset bad guy. We actually need to pass in some stuff here. So bad guy node is going to be the bad guy node, and the Y position is the Y position that they passed into this function itself, and we need that to be a named parameter. So we have the end of the screen right, which is going to be his X position, and the bad guy node dot position dot Y is just going to be the Y position. So we'll set that guy's position. That's how we'll reset the bad guy. So we don't have to write that twice later. For our actual bad guy class, we can also set the Y position of where he currently is. And that's going to be equal to the bad guy node dot position dot Y, which we just set in our reset bad guy. And then the last thing we're going to do is add that bad guy to the screen using the bad guy node. So now we should have our bad guys on the screen once we finish our add bad guys function. So what we'll do here, the way we can call this is we can say add bad guy, and let's say first we add Natasha, and then the speed of Natasha is 1.0. And then the Y position of Natasha is a CG float. And that CG float is going to be self.size.height divided by 4. So we're going to kind of evenly space them up and down the screen. So we'll make a couple of Natashas. Actually, let's make them not go in order. So we'll add a Boris, and that's going to be using the image named in the image assets. Boris, let's say, has a speed of 1.5. He's going to be at, let's say, CG float 0. So that's right in the middle of the screen. And then we'll add a Paul. You can add as many of these as you want at any position on the screen, obviously. And we'll just do the same thing we did for the other one, except we'll make it negative. So there's 3 bad guys, and obviously you can add as many as you want. Let's make Paul move really fast. Let's just take a look at what we have so far. So now you can see it added whatever sprite we wanted on the screen all the way to the right. Now we have our guys moving, and we just want to get the bad guys moving as well. And we'll say if the game is not over, because we don't want to do this when the game's over, we'll stop all movement of the bad guys. We can say update bad guys position. And what we'll do is we'll loop through our array of bad guys. So we'll say for each bad guy in bad guys, and then we'll say if that bad guy is not moving. So now we can really write this almost in English. It's really nice. So if that bad guy is not currently moving, meaning he didn't choose to kind of start moving across the screen, then we'll increase his time of, how much longer he has, or it'll actually decrement his time of how much time he has to wait. So we'll say bad guy.currentFrame++. And what we can then say is if the bad guy.currentFrame is greater than the bad guy.randomFrame, bad guy.moving is equal to true. So all we have to do, we just have to say start moving across the screen, just moving. That's all we have to do. And then we can say otherwise, if the bad guy is currently moving, then we can say bad guy.guy, which is the sprite node itself, .position.y, and this is where we're going to do the math. We can say, we can use a CG float. Within that, because the sign function uses a double, we have to convert this to a double so that we can add it to the sign function, which returns a double. So we'll say bad guy.angle, and then multiply that times the bad guy.range. So that's the meaty little math function that'll make them go in a wave. And after each one, all we have to do is increase the angle by hero.speed, and that'll make them go in a wave. That's a sine wave. Bad guy.guy.position.x, so basically how far they are going left, is greater than the end of the screen left. Now we're writing it just like English because we made these really nice variables. We can say if they aren't all the way off the left side of the screen, we'll continue to then move them. So we'll say that we'll continue to move them by their speed. So bad guy.speed. So their position is going to be subtracted by the bad guy.speed. Otherwise, they are off the screen, so we need to reset their position. So we need to say bad guy.guy.position.x is equal to end of screen right, and we can say bad guy.currentFrame, so we'll reset the waiting time is back to 0, and we'll reset a random frame for them. So we'll set their random frame so that they have to wait a random amount of time before moving again. We'll also say that they're currently no longer moving. That's equal to false. And we'll say bad guy.range is going to be plus equal to 0.1. So every time that they get across the screen, we will increase their range. So they'll start to swoop at a bigger wave, and it'll get harder for everybody to play this game. Then we'll just update the score, which we haven't written yet, and we'll just write a function called update score, but we won't write it yet. We can actually run this now. So you can see these guys waiting a random amount of time. When they get to the other side of the screen, they return to their original position. You can see that sometimes they wait longer, but they aren't colliding with the hero yet.